The morning my brother sold me, the rain had not yet stopped. It had drummed on the roof of Pellingham Park for 3 nights without ceasing, and by the time the carriage wheels grated on the gravel, I had already stopped pretending I did not know what was coming. My brother had not told me. He never told me anything. But the cook had wept into the soup the evening before, and the housekeeper had laid out my mother's pearls on the dressing table without being asked. And I am not a stupid woman. A girl who has been counted as a piece of household furniture since she was 12 learns the language of doors closing, of voices dropping, of names not spoken in her presence. So when Markham came to fetch me down to the drawing room, I knew. I knew that whatever was about to be decided in that room had already been decided. I was being summoned to hear the verdict, not to give one. I rose from the window seat where I had been pretending to read. The book was a volume of sermons, my stepmother's choice. She had a great fondness for sermons, in the same way a hangman has a great fondness for rope. I set it down with care, because I had learned long ago that the only revenge available to a woman in my position was to never give them the satisfaction of seeing her hurry. "Miss Helena," Markham said. He was an old man, and he had served my father, and his eyes were rimmed with something that might have been pity if he had been allowed to feel it. "His Grace the Duke of Ashborne is in the drawing-room, with your brother, miss." The Duke of Ashborne. I do not know what my face did then. I felt my hands go cold inside my sleeves, and the small, tight sound of the rain on the window pane became, for a moment, the only sound in the world. I had heard that name spoken in this house exactly twice. Once, 3 years ago, when my brother had returned from London with a face like a man who had glimpsed his own ruin in a card-room mirror. And once, 6 weeks ago, when a black-edged letter had been delivered before breakfast, and my brother had crushed it in his fist and called for brandy at 9:30 in the morning. The Duke of Ashborne held my brother's notes. All of them. I did not know how many or for how much, but I had seen what knowing it had done to my brother's hands. And now the Duke had come into our house in the rain. "Thank you, Markham," I said, and my voice did not shake, because I had spent 11 years of my life teaching it not to. I did not look at the mirror as I passed it on the stairs. I knew what I would see, and I did not need to see it. A girl of 23, in a grey muslin 2 seasons out of fashion. Dark hair coiled too tight at the nape, because my stepmother considered loose hair vulgar. And the eyes everyone had always said were my mother's. Too wide, too dark, too easy to read. My one signature feature, my mother used to say, was a small white scar at my hairline, where I had fallen against a stone fender at the age of 6. She had kissed it every night for 8 months before she died. I touched it now, the way I always did when I was afraid, and I went down to meet the man my brother meant to give me to. The drawing-room door was already open. He was standing at the window with his back to the room when I entered, and that, more than anything, told me what kind of man he was. A man who turned his back on a room he had not yet measured was either a fool or so certain of his own command of it that he did not need to look. The Duke of Ashborne was not a fool. He was tall, that much I had heard. What I had not heard was that he was built like a man who had earned the breadth of his shoulders rather than inherited it. A soldier's frame, not a courtier's. His hair was dark, near to black, with a single thread of silver beginning at the left temple, though he could not have been much above 31. He wore a dark coat of superfine wool, perfectly cut, and high black boots that had been wiped clean of the road, but not polished. He had not stopped to dress for us. He had come straight in. My brother Edmund stood by the fire with a glass already in his hand at 11 in the morning, and his colour was very bad. "Helena," Edmund said, "come in. Sit there." He gestured at the small chair set at an angle to the hearth, the chair my stepmother used when she meant to lecture me. The chair placed exactly where the light from the window would fall across my face, while leaving the rest of the room in shadow. I had been brought into this room to be looked at. I did not sit. I crossed the carpet to the centre of the room and stopped there, and I made myself look at the Duke as he turned. I had expected. I do not know what I had expected. Cruelty, perhaps. The cold, satisfied face of a man who had come to collect what he was owed. What I saw instead was a man whose eyes were the colour of cold tea, and whose face had the still, deliberate composure of a man who had taught himself not to show what he was thinking, not because he had nothing to hide, but because he had a great deal. There was a thin, pale line that ran from the corner of his left eyebrow down toward his cheekbone. An old scar, faded almost to nothing. The kind of scar a man does not speak of. He looked at me for the space of 3 breaths. "Your Grace," I said, and I curtsied, because that much I could do. "Miss Wickham." His voice was lower than I had expected, and quieter, and it landed somewhere beneath my breastbone in a way I did not understand and did not want to. "Sit down, Helena," my brother said, sharper this time. "His Grace has not got all morning." I sat. The Duke did not. He moved from the window to the mantel and rested one hand against it, and from there he could see both of us at once. Edmund did not seem to notice the geometry of the room had been rearranged in a single move. I noticed. "Helena," Edmund said, in the voice he used when he was about to read me a list of my failures. "His Grace has been good enough to come to Pellingham himself, rather than write, because the matter we have been discussing concerns you directly, and he wished to see the situation in person." I said nothing. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I kept my eyes on the small fire screen, embroidered with violets, that had been my mother's last piece of work. "You are aware," Edmund continued, with the careful slowness of a man who had rehearsed this speech against a mirror, that there have been financial circumstances, difficulties. You are not a child, Helena, and there is no purpose in pretending otherwise. The estate is in arrears. The notes are held by His Grace. The amount is considerable. £11,000, the Duke said quietly from the mantel, plus interest. Edmund flinched. "Yes," he said. "Yes, quite. And His Grace has done me the very great courtesy of suggesting an arrangement by which the matter might be settled without the intervention of the courts, or the public sale of the estate, or anything that would bring scandal upon the family name." He paused. He drank. I watched his throat move. "His Grace requires a wife," Edmund said. "He has, I understand, no immediate prospect, and the matter of an heir presses upon him. He has been good enough to indicate that a quiet marriage, conducted by special license, with a young woman of good birth and unblemished reputation, would discharge the debt entire, the notes returned, the estate clear, the family preserved." The fire screen blurred. I had known on the stairs. I had known when Markham said the name. But knowing a thing is different from hearing your own brother say it in a room with a man it concerns, standing 6 feet away with his hand on the mantel. "And so," Edmund said, with a small, unsteady laugh that he probably believed was hearty, "we find ourselves in agreement, His Grace and I, that you, Helena, would suit the purpose admirably. You are of an age, you are healthy, you have not been out in society to any great degree, but that is hardly a hindrance. We have settled the matter between us. The license may be obtained within the week. There is, of course, no need for any further discussion. Mr. Wickham." The Duke had not raised his voice. He had not needed to. Edmund stopped mid-sentence with his mouth open. The Duke had not moved from the mantel. His hands still rested on the marble. But his eyes had shifted, very slightly, from the middle distance to my brother's face. And there was something in them now that had not been there before. Something cool and attentive, the way a cat is attentive to a thing that has just become interesting. "You have not asked your sister," he said. Edmund laughed. It was a terrible laugh. "Your Grace, with respect, we don't need her answer. The matter is settled between us. She is a sensible girl. She will see at once where her duty lies." "I do," the Duke said very quietly. The two words fell into the room like a stone dropped into a still pond, and for a long moment afterwards there was no other sound at all but the rain. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace," my brother said. The Duke turned then, fully, away from the mantel and toward me. He did not look at Edmund again. When he spoke to me, and only to me, and his voice was no longer quiet. "I do need her answer," he said. "I will not have a wife who has been delivered to me like a parcel, by a man who could not be troubled to ask her opinion in her own drawing-room. If this marriage is to take place, it will take place because Miss Wickham consents to it, of her own will, with full understanding of what it means and what it does not. If she does not consent, I will tear up your brother's notes in this room before I leave it, and you will hear no more from me on the subject. Either way, Mr. Wickham, you are not the person I came to ask." He paused. "I came to ask her." I think I stopped breathing. I had not, in 23 years, ever heard a man speak of me as a person whose answer mattered. My father had loved me, but my father had been a soft, distracted man, whose decisions were made for him by my mother. And after my mother died, they were made for him by my stepmother. And after my father died, they were made for me by my brother. No one had ever asked me what I wanted. Not about a husband, not about a journey, not about a gown, not even about whether I should like a piece of cake at tea. I had been spoken about, and spoken for, and spoken over. But I had not been spoken to about my own life since I was 12 years old. And now, a man I had never met, a man to whom my brother owed £11,000, a man whose single sentence could ruin every person in this house, had crossed a room in the rain to ask me what I wanted. I could not answer, not at first. I sat in the chair where my stepmother had taught me to sit, with my hands folded as my stepmother had taught me to fold them. And I felt the years of being a piece of furniture come up into my throat and lodge there like a fist. "Your Grace," Edmund began, in the voice of a man trying very hard not to sound like a man who was drowning. This is most irregular." "Be quiet, Edmund." I said it before I knew I had decided to say it. My own voice, in my own house, telling my brother to be quiet. He was so astonished that he obeyed. I rose from the chair, I do not remember deciding to rise. I crossed the carpet to the window, and I stood at the same window where the Duke had stood, and I looked out at the grey rain over the gravel sweep, and the rooks circling above the elms, and I tried to think. A bargain. It was still a bargain. A man does not come to a country house in the rain to discharge £11,000 of debt out of the goodness of his heart. He needed a wife. He had said so. He needed an heir, an unobjectionable woman of good birth, and he had selected me from a list as a man selects a horse, for soundness, for breeding, for the absence of obvious flaws. Whatever feeling I had felt at his words a moment before, I was not a fool, and I would not let myself become one in the next minute. But he had stopped my brother in the middle of his sentence. But he had said, "I came to ask her." I turned from the window. He was watching me. He had not pretended to look elsewhere while I composed myself. He had stood and watched me think, and there had been no impatience in his face at all. "Your Grace," I said. My voice was perfectly steady. I did not know how. "May I ask you a question before I answer?" "Ask me as many as you wish." "If I refuse you," I said, "what becomes of my brother?" Edmund made a sound from the hearth. The Duke did not look at him. He looked at me, and his answer, when it came, was given to me as if no one else were in the room. "I will tear up the notes," he said, "today, in this house. He will be free of the debt and of any future claim upon him by me or by anyone acting in my name. You have my word on it." "Even if I refuse?" "Even if you refuse." "Why?" He was silent for a long moment. "Because if you refuse me out of fear for your brother," he said, "your refusal is not a refusal. It is another transaction. And I came here to be free of transactions in this matter, Miss Wickham. I will not buy a wife. Not from him. Not from anyone." I looked at him. I looked at the scar at his eyebrow, and the silver thread at his temple, and the hand still resting against the mantle, as if he were holding himself in place by it. And I understood, with a lurch I did not expect, that he was afraid. Not of me, not of refusal, of something else, something older, something that had taught him, somewhere in his life, that being wanted was not a thing one could trust without proof. I said, "Your Grace, may I have a day?" "You may have a week." "A day will be enough." He inclined his head. It was the smallest gesture, and the most respectful one I had ever been offered in my own home. "Then I will return tomorrow at this hour," he said. "Whatever your answer, Miss Wickham, the notes are no longer security against you. Mr. Wickham." And now, finally, he turned to my brother. "If you address your sister tonight, in any tone, or on any subject that she has not invited, I will know of it before morning, and I will burn the notes here, and you will receive my answer in court instead. Do I make myself plain?" Edmund's face had gone the colour of old paper. "Yes, Your Grace," Edmund said. The Duke crossed the room. He paused at the door, and he looked back, not at Edmund, but at me. "Miss Wickham," he said quietly, "the decision is yours. I want you to know that I mean that. Tomorrow you may say no, and there will be no consequence to you or to your family, and I will not trouble you again. I came here to ask. I will leave having asked." He bowed, and he was gone. I did not know, then, that no one had ever bowed to me in that room before. The carriage wheels had not yet faded down the drive when my stepmother came down the staircase as if she had been measuring its length for the past quarter-hour, with her ear pressed to the banister, which I assumed she had. She was a tall woman, my stepmother, with pale blue eyes that never quite settled, and a habit of touching the cameo at her throat when she was about to say something cruel. She touched it now. "Well," she said, "of course you will accept him, Helena. There is no question of it. To imagine you might do otherwise it is absurd." "I have not yet decided," I said. "Decided?" She gave a small, thin laugh. "You will decide what your brother tells you to decide, as you always have." But Edmund did not speak. Edmund had collapsed into the wing chair by the fire, with both hands wrapped around his glass. He had been told, by a man with the power to ruin him, that he was not to address me tonight. And for once in my life, my brother was afraid of someone other than himself. I went up to my room, I shut the door. I sat on the edge of the bed and I shook. I did not weep. I had given up weeping at 15, when I had understood that no one in this house was coming to see what was the matter. But I shook for a long time, and I tried to think clearly, and I could not, because the same sentence kept repeating itself in my head, in the Duke's quiet voice. I came to ask her. I was at the writing desk by the window when the maid came to light the candles, and I had not written a word. I had only set out my mother's old portable writing case, a thing of polished walnut my father had given her on their marriage, and which I had carried with me from room to room, like a dog carries a bone, because it was the only thing of hers I had been allowed to keep. I touched the brass clasp now. Inside, beneath the inkwell, was a small bundle of letters my mother had written to me in the year before she died, and which my stepmother had never known about, because Markham had hidden them in the kitchen for me until I was old enough to read them. I had read them so many times that the folds had begun to give way. They had taught me, in my mother's hand, what it was to be loved by someone who saw you. I unfolded the topmost letter. My mother's writing was small and neat. "My darling Helena, never marry a man who does not ask you. Your father asked me 3 times before I answered him, and each time he asked I loved him better, because he was not afraid of my no. A man who fears your no does not deserve your yes. Wait, my love. Wait until you are asked." I closed the letter. I sat very still. Then I took up a fresh sheet of paper, and I dipped the pen, and I wrote 3 lines, and I sealed the letter with the last of my mother's wax, and I rang for Markham, and I told him to see that it was carried to Ashborne House before dawn. The Duke arrived at 11 the next morning. The rain had stopped at last. The gravel was bright with wet sun. He was shown into the drawing room. My brother was not there. My stepmother was not there. I had asked Markham to keep them upstairs by whatever means he could manage, and Markham, who had served my father and who had watched me grow up, had managed it. I came into the room alone. The Duke turned from the window, the same window, and he looked at me. And I saw, in the half-second before he composed his face, that he had not slept. There was a tightness at his mouth that had not been there yet. "Miss Wycombe, Your Grace." I crossed to the centre of the carpet. "I have given you my answer by letter, but I wish to give it again in person, so that there would be no doubt. He waited. "My answer is yes," I said. "But it is yes on conditions, and I will hear them spoken aloud and accepted before I sign anything. I do not propose to be delivered to you like a parcel by myself either, Your Grace, having so recently declined to be delivered to you by my brother." The faintest possible thing happened at the corner of his mouth. It was not a smile. It was the ghost of where a smile might have lived, in a man who had not used the muscles for it in a long while. "Name your conditions." "You will keep your word about my brother's notes. They will be torn up before I leave this house, in front of me." "Done." "You will arrange a chaperone or a position of legitimate household employment for me at Ashborne House until the marriage is solemnized. I am aware of what becomes of a young woman seen to be sheltering under a duke's roof, and I am not inclined to begin our acquaintance with my own ruin. My great-aunt, the Dowager Lady Ashborne, lives at the Dower House at Ashborne. She has agreed to receive you tomorrow as her companion until the wedding. The arrangement was made before I came here yesterday." I had not expected that. I felt my composure slip for half a second, and I think he saw it. "You were that certain I would say yes?" "I was that determined that if you said yes, you would not pay the price of saying it. There is a difference, Miss Wickham." I looked at him. "There is a third condition," I said. "Name it." "You will tell me, before I sign any settlement, why you stopped my brother yesterday. You will tell me the truth of it, not the polite version, the true one." He went very still. The clock on the mantel was the loudest thing in the room for a long moment. Then he crossed to a chair near the fire. Not the chair where I had been placed yesterday, but the one beside it, and he sat. He gestured to its companion, and I sat in it. We were close enough now that I could see the faint shadows beneath his eyes. "My first wife," he said. I had not known he had been married. I did not think anyone in the country knew. My hand closed on the arm of the chair. He paused. The line at his mouth was very tight. "She died in childbirth in the first year of our marriage. The child did not live an hour. She had not wanted the child, not because she did not want a child, but because she had not, in any part of her short life, been permitted to want or not to want anything. And she went into her confinement frightened and silent, in a way I did not know how to reach. She left a letter for me, written before her time came, in the event that she did not survive it. I have it still. She did not blame me. She blamed her father, and mine, and the arrangement, and herself. Most of all herself, for having said yes to a thing she had never been permitted to say no to. She wrote that she had loved me, in her way, but that loving me had not been her choice. And a love that has not been chosen is a cage with the door painted to look like a window. She wrote that she had loved me, in her way, but that loving me had not been her choice. And a love that has not been chosen is a cage with the door painted to look like a window. He looked at me. The cold tea had gone darker. I swore on her grave that I would never marry again. I broke that oath when I needed an heir and the title, and the estate began to press upon me in earnest. And I told myself I would do it without affection, without expectation, without the lie of love. I would marry a woman who needed the security, and I would give her the security. And we would live as honest strangers under one roof. That was the plan. That was the man who wrote to your brother 6 weeks ago and offered the arrangement. That was the man who walked into this house yesterday morning. He stopped. I had not counted on you, he said quietly, looking up at me from your chair, as if you were waiting to be told what your own life was. I had not counted on hearing your brother say, "We don't need her answer," in the same room where I had stood 8 years ago, and listened to Caroline's father say nearly the same words. I had not counted, Miss Wickham, on it being unbearable. The fire shifted. That is why I stopped him, he said. Not to be admirable, not to seduce you, to save myself from being that man twice. I will not have another wife who said yes because she could not afford to say no. I would rather be alone. I did not realize I was crying until I felt the wet on my cheek. He saw it. He did not move toward me. He sat in his chair as still as he had stood at the mantel. And he let me have the moment, because he understood. He understood, this man, that to reach for me now would be to remake the whole sentence. "Then you have asked me twice, Your Grace," I said when I could. "And my answer is still yes. But I wish you to know that I am saying it to you, not to my brother, not to the debt, not to the rain. To you." "I know," he said. It was not eloquent. It was the most eloquent thing anyone had ever said to me. He took a folded packet from inside his coat and laid it on the small table between us. The notes. He took up the letter knife from the desk, and he looked at me, and I nodded. And he cut them through, once, twice, 3 times, until they were quarters and then eighths, and he laid the pieces on the fire, and we watched £11,000 become ash in less than a minute. My brother did not see it. My brother was upstairs being kept out of the way by Markham. He would learn of it later, and he would learn of it changed. I left Pellingham Park before sundown. I packed my mother's writing case and the bundle of letters with my own hands into a small trunk I had Markham send out from the box room, and I rode in the Duke's carriage to Ashborne, with Markham himself on the box, because the Duke had asked, and because I had said yes. But also because I would not leave my mother's letters in a house where my stepmother might one day think to read them. Some objects you do not leave behind. The Dowager Lady Ashburn received me in the drawing-room of the Dower House at 8:30 in the evening, and she was an entirely different sort of weapon than my stepmother. She was small and very upright, with a face like carved ivory, and a string of pearls she touched, I learned, only when she was amused. She touched them now. "So you are the girl my great-nephew has lost his head over," she said. "Sit down. I have been told to be kind to you, which I find I am quite willing to be. He wrote me a letter this morning that was the most embarrassing document I have read in 40 years. I shall keep it. It will be useful for blackmailing him in his old age. Tea?" I laughed. I had not laughed in this many days. "Yes, my lady." "Please." The Dower House at Ashburn was the first place in 11 years where I had slept under a roof that did not feel like a cage. I noted the difference at once, and I did not stop noting it. I noted it when the maid laid a fire in my room without being asked. I noted it when the Dowager called me down to breakfast as if I had a right to breakfast. I noted it when the gardener tipped his hat to me on the path between the Dower House and the Great House and called me Miss. I noted it when, on my second morning, the Duke came across the park in a riding coat and asked the Dowager if he might walk with me in the rose garden. And the Dowager said, "Certainly not," without a footman in sight. And the Duke said, "Yes, my lady, of course." and the footman walked at a respectful distance behind us and pretended not to hear anything. And the Duke and I walked among the late roses and did not touch, and did not even speak for a long while. And I had never been happier in my life. He was, I learned, a man who told the truth when asked, and not before. I asked him many things in those first weeks. I asked him about Caroline, and he answered me. I asked him about the scar at his eyebrow, and he told me, after a pause, that he had taken it in a duel at 21, over a woman whose name he could not now remember, which had been part of the lesson. I asked him what he had hoped when he set out for Pellingham Park in the rain, and he said he had hoped I would say no, because he had been afraid of what it would mean to him if I said yes. And I asked him what it had meant, and he was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "I came home and I could not eat, Helena, and I have not been a man who could not eat in 8 years. The first time he called me by my name, Helena, in the rose garden, with the gravel crunching under our boots, and the late afternoon turning the brick walls to gold. I felt it in my chest like a struck bell. I had been Miss Wickham to him, and Your Grace to me, for 11 days. He had asked, the night before, if he might call me Helena when we were not in company, and I had said yes, and he had not used it for the entire morning, and I had begun to think he had changed his mind. And then, in the rose garden, very quietly, he said it. Helena. Like a man who had been saving it. I did not call him by his name for another week. His name was Adrian. He was Adrian to no one then alive but his great-aunt, and now to me. The first time I said it aloud to him, in the library at Ashborne, with the dowager dozing over her book in the chair by the window, and the rain beginning again outside, a fire crackling between us. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if I had touched him. Adrian, I said. Yes, he said. Yes. There were complications. There were always going to be complications. My stepmother, denied her settled future at Pellingham, wrote a letter to the dowager that was clearly intended for general circulation, in which she suggested that I had thrown myself at the Duke in a manner that no decent young woman would countenance, and that the Duke had been ensnared by a sly, ambitious creature, and that the marriage ought not to be permitted to take place before the matter could be more thoroughly examined by persons of higher rank and better judgment. The dowager read it aloud over breakfast and laughed until she had to put down her cup. "Oh, my dear," she said, "she is going to be such fun. Adrian, you must let me handle this entirely. I have been bored for a quarter of a century, and your stepmother-in-law is a gift." What the dowager handled, the dowager handled. My stepmother received by return of post an invitation to a small private dinner at Ashborne House 2 weeks before the wedding, an honour she could not, in front of her own circle, refuse without proving she had no real grievance, and an honour she could not accept without sitting at a table where she would be made to understand, with perfect Regency politeness, that her interest in my future had concluded. She came. She wore puce. The dowager seated her between an elderly bishop and an even more elderly admiral, both of whom were extraordinarily deaf, and across from me, where she could see, could not avoid seeing, the way the Duke turned his head when I spoke, the way he set down his glass before answering me, the way the household servants moved around me as if I were already mistress of the house. She did not eat much. She tried, twice, to introduce a remark about my late father's fondness for biddable daughters, and was each time talked across by the dowager with a smiling, "I beg your pardon, Mrs. Hadley. Do try the lamb. It is a particular triumph of our cook's." By the time the ladies withdrew, My stepmother had stopped speaking altogether. I do not believe, in all the time I had known her, that I had ever seen her silenced by anything but her own will. In the drawing room, when the dowager had been called away by a servant, and we found ourselves momentarily alone in opposite corners, my stepmother set down her coffee cup with a rattle and looked at me at last. "You think yourself very clever," she said quietly. "He will tire of you. They always do." I considered her. I considered the woman who had told me at 14 that I was plain, and at 16 that I would never marry, and at 20 that I was a burden upon a family that had been generous past all reason in keeping me. I had spent half my life flinching from her voice. "He may," I said, "though I do not believe it. But whether he does or does not, madam, you will not be in the room to see." I picked up my coffee and met her eye and did not blink. "You will be in your own house, with your own income, on your own terms. The Duke has been generous. He has settled an annuity upon you, out of what was once owed by my brother. It is not large, but it is enough. You will not find Pellingham Park hospitable in future." She went white. "Edmund. Edmund has agreed. Edmund has signed. Edmund understands at last that he is not the head of a household so much as a tenant in one, and that the arrangement which has obtained for these last 11 years, in which I was a silent piece of the furniture, and you were the woman who arranged the furniture, is concluded. I shall not speak of it again. Neither shall you. Good evening." I rose. I crossed the room. I did not look back. The dowager, returning, met my eye, and the dowager, small, upright, ivory-faced dowager, touched her pearls. But the night was not done. There was, of course, my brother. There was always going to be my brother. He had not, even now, accepted that the world had moved without consulting him. 3 nights before the wedding, with the license in the Duke's writing case and the bishop already on his way from Salisbury, Edmund came to Ashborne unannounced. He had ridden from Pellingham in the dark on the strength of a letter from my stepmother, who had not, in the end, given up. He had been drinking. He had been drinking for some time. He demanded to see his sister. He made a scene in the entrance hall loud enough that I heard it from the gallery above, and I came down the stairs in my dressing gown, with my hair loose at the temples, the small thing I was never allowed at Pellingham, and I saw my brother, dishevelled and unshaven, with one hand on the marble banister and the other clenched at his side, attempting to push past Markham to come up to me. The Duke came out of the library at the sound of it. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He crossed the hall in 5 strides, set himself between my brother and the staircase, and said, "Mr. Wickham, you will leave this house. You will leave it on your own legs while you can still claim them, or you will be carried out by my footman, who will not be careful with you. You will not come within 100 yards of my wife." And there, in the marble hall, with my hair loose and the candles burning low, was the first time I heard him say it. My wife, 3 days early. Again, on this estate or any other, without my written invitation, which you will not receive. Your sister has chosen her life. You do not have the standing, in this house or any other, to challenge her choice. Go. Edmund opened his mouth. "Go," the Duke said, very quietly, "or I will tell the room what was said in your drawing room 3 weeks ago. There are 7 witnesses present. You may decide whether you would like them to hear it." My brother went. I came down the rest of the stairs. The Duke turned to me. His face was set hard, and for a moment I saw the man Caroline's father had given his daughter to. A man capable, when the matter required, of considerable steel. Then he saw me, and the hardness folded away from his eyes like a letter being closed. "Helena," he said, "forgive me. I did not wish you to see—" "Adrian," I said, "thank you." He stopped. "You acted," I said, "when I needed someone to. I thanked you because you deserve to be thanked. I will not pretend it was not done, because that would unmake the man who did it, and I have a very particular regard for the man who did it." He looked at me for a long moment, in the candlelight, in the marble hall. "I love you," he said. He had not said it yet. We had gone through 5 weeks of courtship without the word, because he was a man who did not say what he did not mean, and because I was a woman who had learned to be wary of words too easily given. He said it now, quietly, in a hall full of staring footmen, as if it had become impossible to hold in any longer. I had meant to say it at the altar. I find I cannot wait. I love you, Helena. I am not skillful at this. Caroline taught me to be afraid of it. You have taught me to be afraid of being silent. I love you. I crossed the last of the marble between us, and I put my hand against his jaw. The first time I had touched his face. The first time in my life I had touched any man's face. And I felt the rough beginning of his evening beard, and the warmth of his skin, and the small twitch at his temple where he was still holding himself in check. I love you, I said. I think I loved you the moment you said I do in my brother's drawing room. I have been waiting only to be sure I was permitted to. He kissed me. He kissed me there in the hall, with the footmen turning their faces hastily to the walls, and Markham clearing his throat with great industry. And the kiss was not gentle. It was not careful. It was not, in any sense, the kiss of a man who had been waiting only 3 days. It was the kiss of a man who had been waiting 8 years. His hand came up into the loose hair at my temple, and his other arm went around my waist, and I felt, for the first time in my life, what it was to be held by someone who was not afraid of holding me. Every wall I had built since my mother's death came down at once, and I cried into his shoulder for a long time afterwards, and he did not let me go, and I did not want him to. We were married 3 days later by special license in the chapel at Ashborne, with the dowager weeping discreetly into a lace handkerchief in the front pew, and Markham, whom I had insisted upon as a witness, standing at the back in his best coat, with tears running freely down his face, and no apparent intention of stopping them. I wore ivory silk, with the green sprigs my mother had loved. I carried a small posy of late roses from the rose garden, which Adrian had picked himself that morning. He told me so, on the threshold of the chapel, with a small, nervous half-smile I had not seen before. They were the last of the season. He had wanted, he said, to give me the last of something, before he gave me everything else. It is 6 months now since that morning. I write this in the library at Ashborne, at a desk Adrian had brought up from his study because, he said, mine was too small. The light comes through the great west window and falls across the page. My mother's writing case sits at my elbow. My mother's letters are in the top drawer, where they belong, in a house that loves the woman she made. There has been correspondence with Edmund, sparse, careful, mediated through a solicitor. He has, I am told, taken himself to the country to economize, and to drink less, and to write a book of agricultural improvements, which he will not finish. My stepmother is in Bath. The dowager calls upon us every Sunday and stays for tea, and tells us scandalous things about the regent, that I am not, she says, to repeat. I am with child. We have not told anyone yet, but the dowager, who wept for the second time in our presence, and then immediately demanded a name, and Markham, who is now butler at Ashborne, and who made no remark at all when I told him, but who has been polishing the silver with great attention and humming for 3 weeks, which is very nearly the same thing. In the rose garden, where Adrian first called me Helena, there is a small marble bench he had set there in the summer. On the back of it, in letters so small you have to bend close to read them, is engraved a single line. He had it cut without telling me. I found it on a morning in September, when the roses had finished and the air smelt of wood smoke and wet grass, and I read it twice, and then sat down on the bench and wept, and then went into the house and found him in his study, and kissed him on the top of his bent head as he wrote, and would not tell him why. The line reads, I came to ask her. It was the sentence that began my life. It is, I believe, the sentence I will carry with me until the end of it. The rain in the drawing-room at Pellingham was the longest rain of my life, and it ended that morning, and it has not, in any way that matters, rained on me since.